Welcome back to Who Shot JFK. We've been on this journey together, kind of wading through all the speculation and evidence and theories.
Trying to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, around one of America's most enduring mysteries.
A case that even decades later just won't stay closed.
And it just won't go away. And today we're tackling something pretty massive. We're doing a deep dive into Vincent Bugliosi's Reclaiming History.
Now, Bugliosi, as you may know, is the brilliant mind behind Helter Skelter, that definitive account of the Manson murders.
He was the prosecutor who brought those horrors to light.
That's right.
And he approaches the JFK assassination with that same rigor, that same investigative spirit, and really kind of dissects the Warren Commission's findings.
And just to remind everybody, the Warren Commission concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in assassinating President Kennedy.
So, I'm not going to lie, Bugliosi's book is a beast. It's over 1,600 pages.
That's a big one.
But it's a journey worth taking.
Oh, absolutely.
And one of the things that's really striking right off the bat is Bugliosi's assertion that JFK's death was probably the greatest single traumatic event in American history.
Wow.
He says it surpasses even the 9/11 attacks in its impact on the national psyche.
That's a bold statement given the sheer horror and global reach of 9/11.
It is.
But Bugliosi points to the reaction after JFK's assassination. For 3 days, commercial television across the entire United States went dark.
Can you imagine that happening today?
Inconceivable in our 24/7 news cycle world.
Exactly.
And the volume of books, the sheer amount of literature dedicated to the JFK assassination dwarfs any other historical event, including 9/11.
It really does.
And Bugliosi argues that the Kennedys, especially JFK and Jackie, they were perceived as almost royalty. There was this deep personal connection with the public.
So it makes the assassination feel less like a political event and more like this deeply personal loss.
Yeah, almost like a death in the family for the whole country.
Exactly.
Shattering this sense of security and innocence that the nation had.
So where does the Warren Commission fit into all of this? Bugliosi seems to be their staunchest defender. He argues that they did a really commendable job investigating this assassination.
Yeah, he's pretty adamant about that. He states flat out that anybody who disagrees with the Warren Commission probably has never been part of an actual murder investigation.
Wow.
And he contends that their conclusions, even the tiny details like the timing of the first shot hitting Kennedy, have stood the test of time even with all of our modern forensic technology.
So that brings us to the elephant in the room, right? All the conspiracy theories surrounding this assassination.
Yeah, we can't escape those.
They're everywhere.
Yeah.
And Bugliosi doesn't hold back. He accuses many conspiracy theorists of basically cherry-picking evidence.
Yeah, just taking what they like.
To fit their narrative rather than approaching the case objectively.
Confirmation bias at its finest.
Exactly. He even points to Jonathan Whitney's critique of Gerald Posner's Case Closed as a prime example.
Now, for context, Posner is a proponent of the lone gunman theory. But Whitney accuses him of only using the evidence that supports his stance.
So Bugliosi's saying the selective use of evidence has really kind of poisoned the well of public opinion.
Absolutely. He argues that it's led a majority of Americans to believe that the Warren Commission was flawed and that we'll never know the truth.
And he laments that figures like Dan Rather and Bob Katz, who believe that the truth is buried forever, they just fuel this sense of hopelessness and distrust.
Yeah, it creates this sense that we're chasing shadows.
It does. So it's this battle between Bugliosi's unwavering faith in the Warren Commission and this tidal wave of conspiracy theories that really forms the core of his book.
It's a clash of perspectives, for sure.
Now, one thing that really struck me is how Bugliosi meticulously reconstructs the events leading up to the assassination. He takes us deep into the Kennedy's Texas trip.
He does. He unearths some really fascinating details. Like, did you know that Jackie Kennedy discovered this impressive art collection in their Fort Worth hotel suite?
No.
Featuring works by Monet, Picasso, Van Gogh.
Imagine that presidential perks include private viewings of masterpieces.
Right, and he doesn't stop there. He paints this really vivid picture of the morning of the assassination.
Okay.
JFK calling former Vice President John Nance Garner to wish him a happy 95th birthday.
Wow.
Jackie chatting on the phone with Ruth Carter Johnson, who was the curator behind that amazing art collection.
All these nearly mundane details, but knowing what's coming, it creates this powerful sense of foreboding.
It does. The normalcy of life right before tragedy strikes.
And this meticulousness extends to his account of Lee Harvey Oswald's movements on that day. He recounts a conversation Oswald had with his coworker, Bonnie Ray Williams, at the Texas School Book Depository.
Oh, yeah, that's a chilling one.
So what were they discussing?
Williams was describing the president's motorcade route, which would pass right by the book depository.
Oh, wow.
And Oswald was listening intently. Then he just walked away. Bugliosi also notes that Oswald arrived at the depository that morning and specifically went to the 6th floor shortly after 10:00 a.m.
It's chilling, knowing what we know now. He was positioning himself.
Yeah, setting the stage for the assassination.
So Bugliosi then meticulously recounts the assassination itself, drawing on eyewitness accounts.
He does, and there's this particularly vivid description from James Crawford and Marianne Mitchell, who are watching from the southeast corner of Houston and Elm Streets.
So they had a clear view.
Oh yeah, they had a front row seat as the motorcade turned onto Elm Street moments before the shots rang out.
And then chaos.
Utter pandemonium. He captures the frenzy, that frantic call from Robert McNeil to NBC News in New York.
Everyone's scrambling for information.
Exactly. And the initial confusion of Deputy Sheriff Buddy Walters, who was investigating the railroad yard behind the grassy knoll.
He thought that's where the shots came from.
At first, yeah. But imagine this is before social media, before instant news updates. Everything was fragmented, fueling fear and uncertainty.
Bugliosi also highlights the encounter between Howard Brennan and Officer J.D. Tippit with Oswald shortly after the assassination.
Oh, right.
And wasn't Brennan's description crucial in shifting the focus of the investigation towards Oswald?
Absolutely. His account led to a citywide search for a man matching Oswald's appearance.
And of course, the tragic shooting of Officer Tippit just 45 minutes after Kennedy was killed.
Solidified Oswald as the prime suspect.
Leading to that dramatic arrest at the Texas Theater.
It was like something out of a movie.
Bugliosi walks us through it all. Oswald trying to evade the police, the struggle, the desperation.
You can almost feel the tension.
And then the interrogation, led by Captain Will Fritz. What were the main points they focused on?
Fritz wanted to know everything Oswald's whereabouts during the assassination, his political leanings, his involvement with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee.
A pro-Castro organization.
Oh, exactly.
And then, of course, the discovery of the rifle at Ruth Payne's house.
Oh, man, that must have been a crushing realization for Marina Oswald.
Up to that point, she seemed to genuinely believe in her husband's innocence.
But finding that rifle hidden at their friend's house, it all started to click into place.
Her world falling apart as the nation grappled with this enormous tragedy.
Bugliosi captures that global outpouring of grief and shock. He quotes journalists like Tom Wicker and Relman Morin who describe a world plunged into darkness.
He even quotes Nikita Khrushchev,
Kennedy's Cold War adversary. Even he expressed sorrow. It just shows the impact of Kennedy's presidency, the hope he represented even across ideological divides.
So amidst this grief, the machinery of government had to continue, leading to Lyndon B. Johnson being sworn in as president.
Right on Air Force One.
Bugliosi details the decision to hold the ceremony there, and the delay caused by Jackie Kennedy refusing to leave Dallas without her husband's body.
A powerful detail showcasing her strength and resolve in the face of unimaginable tragedy.
Absolutely. And then the formation of the Warren Commission tasked with investigating this assassination. Bugliosi recounts Chief Justice Earl Warren's initial reluctance to chair it.
Didn't he oppose Supreme Court justices engaging in extrajudicial activities?
He did, but he eventually accepted setting the stage for one of the most scrutinized investigations in history.
And Bugliosi highlights the significance of Marina Oswald's testimony to the commission, even though her credibility was later questioned. He also acknowledges the challenges they faced analyzing the Zapruder film and the development of the single bullet theory.
A theory that still sparks debate and fuels conspiracy theories.
It's a lightning rod for sure.
Before we get into those complexities, though, Bugliosi takes us back to Oswald's past, and he paints this pretty stark picture of his childhood and adolescence. What really stood out to you from those formative years?
I mean, it's really a pattern of instability and isolation, constant moves, lack of lasting friendships, and this craving for attention, even if it was negative attention.
Kind of sounds like a recipe for trouble.
Yeah, you could say that. It's definitely not the most stable foundation for a young person to build on. And then there's his defection to the Soviet Union.
Yeah, what can you tell us about that chapter in his life?
Well, Bugliosi suggests that Oswald was really drawn to Marxist ideology. He saw it as a way to reject the American system that he felt had failed him. So defecting was like this grand gesture, thumbing his nose at the country that he felt had wronged him.
But even in the Soviet Union, he couldn't find his place.
No, life in Minsk wasn't the utopia he thought it would be. He faced a lot of bureaucratic hurdles, struggled to find meaningful work, and just felt increasingly isolated.
So that led him back to the U.S.
Yeah, but he returned even more alienated and lost than before.
And this brings us to another really pivotal point, that Bugliosi explores Oswald's fixation on General Edwin Walker. Hey, this is a controversial right-wing figure.
Right, Walker was a staunch anti-communist and segregationist. He was actually forced to resign from the military.
Wow.
And Oswald saw him as a symbol of everything he hated about America.
So what did Oswald do with this fixation?
Well, Bugliosi reveals that Oswald actually tried to assassinate Walker in April of 1963.
Before Kennedy?
Yes. He fired a shot at Walker through a window.
Oh my God.
Luckily, Walker only had minor injuries.
So he had already shown a capacity for violence.
Exactly. And Bugliosi uses this incident to really bolster his argument that the Kennedy assassination wasn't just some random act. It was a culmination of Oswald's simmering rage and this desire for notoriety.
So it raises an important question. What was Oswald's motive for killing Kennedy? Does Bugliosi delve into that at all?
He does, and it's complicated. Bugliosi argues that Oswald was driven by a whole bunch of things: resentment towards authority, a history of failures, and this really twisted desire to leave his mark on history.
A perfect storm of personality flaws and circumstances.
You could say that. And remember, this was a time of immense social and political upheaval. The Cold War was at its peak. The threat of nuclear annihilation was very real, and Oswald was clearly drawn to these ideological conflicts.
Like he was searching for a cause, something to give his life meaning.
Yeah, and tragically, he found it in this act of violence.
A horrible misdirection of his energy and anger, for sure. Now, we can't talk about the JFK assassination without talking about Jack Ruby, the man who shot Oswald.
Yeah, another layer of complexity in this already complex case.
What does Bugliosi say about Ruby?
Bugliosi describes him as this troubled and unstable individual, a Dallas nightclub owner with ties to organized crime. He was fascinated by the Kennedys, both JFK and Robert.
And wasn't he present at the police station during Oswald's interrogation?
Bugliosi describes Ruby kind of lurking around the police station, seemingly fixated on the case. And then on November 24th, as Oswald was being transferred, Ruby just stepped forward and shot him live on television.
A moment seared into everyone's memory.
It was shocking. It really added fuel to the conspiracy fire.
So what was Ruby's motive?
He claimed it was to spare Jackie Kennedy the pain of a trial.
But a lot of people believe there was more to it.
Of course, there are theories that Ruby was part of a bigger conspiracy, but Bugliosi dismisses those as unfounded. He sees Ruby's act as impulsive, driven by his instability and obsession with the Kennedys.
A tragic, chaotic act that just made things even more confusing.
Exactly. And it brings us back to Bugliosi's main point. Despite all these swirling conspiracy theories, the evidence points to Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone.
And he really goes to great lengths to dismantle those theories.
He does.
We talked about the single bullet theory earlier, the idea that one bullet hit both Kennedy and Governor Connally.
Right. That's essential to the Warren Commission's conclusion. Otherwise, you'd need a second shooter.
What does Bugliosi say about that?
He looks at everything. The Zapruder film, The Autopsy, reports eyewitness testimony. He concludes that the single bullet theory is valid.
But that's where a lot of people disagree.
Oh yeah, it's one of the most controversial parts of the case. Critics argue that the bullet's trajectory would have been impossible. They point to inconsistencies in witness statements and question the bullet's path.
And there's the issue of Oswald's marksmanship. Was he even capable of making those shots?
Another point Bugliosi addresses. He looks at Oswald's military records, which show he was a trained marksman. Not exceptional, but trained.
But was he good enough?
Bugliosi thinks so. He argues that Oswald could have made the shots given the distance and the slow speed of the limo.
Okay, so putting Oswald aside for a minute, let's go back to Bugliosi's view of the Warren Commission. He's really their champion.
He is. He argues they were thorough and impartial despite the pressure and scrutiny. He admits they made some mistakes, but says those were unintentional and don't change their findings.
But he doesn't hold back when criticizing those who disagree with the commission.
Not at all. He's especially harsh towards those who promote conspiracy theories without real evidence. He accuses them of profiting from tragedy and twisting the truth.
So he really believes the Warren Commission got it right. But if that's true, why do these conspiracy theories persist? Why are so many people convinced there was a cover-up?
That's the million-dollar question. I think it speaks to the nature of conspiracy theories. They provide a sense of order in the face of chaos. People want to believe someone's in control.
And in a case like this, with so many unanswered questions, it's easy to see how those theories take hold.
Absolutely. And when you add in powerful entities like the CIA and the mafia, it just throws gasoline on the fire.
So where does that leave us? Decades after the assassination, are we any closer to the truth?
Depends on who you asked. Bugliosi obviously believes the truth is in the Warren report.
but a lot of people still have doubts.
Exactly. It's likely the debate will continue for generations.
A story shrouded in mystery, even as we learn more.
And that's part of what makes it so captivating. The search for our answers the quest for truth.
Well, we've covered a lot, but there's still so much more in Reclaiming History.
It's dense, but Bugliosi is a great guide.
As we navigate this path, it reminds us of how fragile history is, how easily it can be fractured by speculation.
But amidst the fragments, there's hope. The belief that truth, even if it's hard to find, is worth pursuing.
Before we wrap up this deep dive into Reclaiming History, let's go back to Oswald's past trajectory. Bugliosi paints a disturbing picture of his younger years.
He does. We talked about his unstable childhood, the moves, a difficult relationship with his mother.
But there's more. What other red flags did Bugliosi uncover?
Oh yeah, there are some pretty disturbing incidents, like Oswald threatening his sister-in-law with a knife when he was just a teenager.
Wow, that's not just a typical teenage outburst.
No, it suggests a deeper darkness, a simmering rage that seemed to go unchecked.
And then there's the defection to the Soviet Union. Was that purely ideological, or was there something more to it?
Bugliosi suggests it was a mix of things. Oswald was drawn to communist ideology, for sure. He saw it as a rejection of America, a system he felt had failed him. But it was also this huge act of defiance, a way to get attention to thumb his nose at the country he felt had wronged him.
So a desperate attempt to be someone to make a statement.
Exactly. But even in the Soviet Union, he couldn't find what he was looking for. Life in Minsk wasn't the utopia he had imagined.
Which led to his disillusionment and eventually his return to the U.S. even more alienated and lost.
Right. And Bugliosi argues that this sense of failure of being caught between two worlds is key to understanding what Oswald did later.
You mean his assassination of President Kennedy?
Yeah, this horrific act driven by a twisted need for significance.
Let's talk about Jack Ruby again, the man who shot Oswald, adding another layer of chaos to this whole tragedy. What does Bugliosi say about him?
He paints a really complex picture of Ruby. This Dallas nightclub owner with mob ties, deeply fascinated by the Kennedys, both JFK and Robert Bugliosi believes Ruby's act was impulsive, fueled by grief over Kennedy's death, a desire for recognition, and his own volatile personality.
So not part of some grand conspiracy, but a tragic act driven by personal demons.
Exactly. Bugliosi really dismantles those theories that Ruby was a hitman or part of a bigger plot. He sees it as the chaotic outcome of a troubled mind.
Which brings us back to Bugliosi's central argument that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in killing President Kennedy.
That's the conclusion he comes to after all that research, meticulously tracing Oswald's steps, analyzing his motives, and debunking all those conspiracy theories.
He lays it all out with his signature thoroughness. But even after this deep dive into reclaiming history, I still have questions, lingering doubts.
I think that's natural with a tragedy like this. We want a clear answer, a definitive explanation. But sometimes history just doesn't give us that.
Bugliosi tries to bring clarity to the chaos, to reclaim history from all the speculation and conspiracy. Whether he succeeds is up to each reader to decide.
What's clear is that Bugliosi's work shows how important meticulous research is. We need to look at evidence with a critical eye and challenge those easy answers that conspiracy theories often offer.
Reclaiming history is a tough read, but it's worth it. It makes us confront uncomfortable truths about Oswald, about the things that shaped him, and about our own tendency to search for meaning, even in the darkest parts of history.
And maybe that's the biggest legacy of the JFK assassination. It's not the endless debate about who shot him, but the questions it raises about how we view history truth and the power of conspiracy theories.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Vincent Bugliosi's Reclaiming History. It's a book that will stay with you long after you finish it, prompting you to think about the complexities of history and the elusive nature of truth. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and never stop seeking answers, even when faced with mysteries that seem impossible to solve.